Hello, 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 hello. It is your good friend Wild Philosopher here once more to remind you that gnomes are real. So today we're going to be wading into some controversial waters, a bit topical but still a bit controversial, because we will be talking about AI, or artificial intelligence, and the immense strides it has made in producing horrifyingly shambolic homunculi that ape human beings. And especially, we will be talking about deepfakes and what the existence of and spread of this tech, as well as its ease of access, entails for, the pursuit of truth, the pursuit of trust, the pursuit of freedom in our society and in our lives. Before we proceed into the actual lecture, I will just state at the outset that while we will be talking about a couple ongoing political examples, our interest is certainly not in modern politics. And I'm not going to be talking about what should or should not be done in the political sphere. I'm not a legal expert. This is not a legal channel. I am not going to pretend, especially I'm not American. I don't know American law. Right. My specialty is epistemology, philosophy, epistemology, phenomenology, metaphysics, a little bit of communications theory, but from a philosophical angle. It's not politics, and it's not law. So do not take any of what we are about to say as advice as to, or our views on what legislation should say about anything, nor about our views on contemporary political figures. Right? We'll be talking about a few because I'll be airing deepfake clips, and of course they're all of real political people, real people. Actually, yeah, real people in various politics, political, like talking heads type stuff.
We hope they're actually real people and not generations of machines.
Well, yeah, actually, that is a good point. A lot of the people in politics are individuals you basically never hear of, right? Especially the ones involved in the bureaucracy, and yet every now and then they'll be trot out to deliver speeches. The people who we're talking about, probably exist because I know of their existence prior to deepfakes. But in the future, it is entirely reasonable to expect that we could have deepfakes for people who never existed, where they are presented as having roles or jobs that they don't exist, or that obviously because they don't exist, they don't actually have. While the people who are actually involved in those roles are incapable of providing any corrections because they can talk about their identity all they want if nobody actually trusts that they are the one that hold the role and not the fake deepfake going under their name. I want to give an example here, but I saw some pretty interesting articles around the middle of July on officials in the White House and who actually had power to adjudicate decisions, given if Biden was incompetent. And I had never heard of any of them before. And probably will never hear of most of them again. But without further ado, I guess we should give a brief definition. So a deepfake, for those of you who watch this channel maybe for other types of content and aren't too familiar, deepfake is a variety of artificial intelligence tech that allows you to mimic the voice and even make fake video exemplars of, real people, or in future fake people, of course, and produce highly convincing fabrications. They've existed for a while, but the technology has really improved, especially since the AI, what they're calling the AI revolution of 2022. And you can now, I don't want to say anyone can generate a deep fake, but it's fantastically easy for whoever wants to generate one within a few hours. Like it's not especially hard, thus allowing near infinite creations of people who might or might not exist, presenting opinions they may or may not have in a manner that is ambiguous to the audience watching, absent other cues or information. So we'll be providing some examples. Most of them are obviously deep fakes because of visual cues within the videos that nobody would, actually I shouldn't say nobody, you would have to be really silly or really uninformed to believe that the people involved would actually say the types of things that are being attributed to them in the clip. Which I will asterisk by noting that maybe in these examples it's not too convincing, but we'll be pointing out some potential other instances where they might be more convincing. And not especially theoretical instances either. Some of them are actually real. Some deep fakes I did not want to play for legal issues, right? You don't want to get, I want to get the channel in trouble. Any other info you want to give on deep fakes before we launch into it? Or?
Yeah. I mean, one of the ethical concerns, like beyond even politicians, is just like the possibility of like using people's faces without their consent, right? Faces, bodies, like a lot of really scummy things going on.
Oh yeah. We'll be talking about politics, but like I am Jewish. You have no idea how many people are arrested for pretending to be rabbis to disseminate false statements about like murdering the goyim. It happens every single year. There are so many like they will put on a funny hat, they will record themselves, give themselves a ridiculous fake, like Rabbi Steinstein, and go record some fake video and then put it online. And now they just do it with real rabbis. Right, they can take, like Rabbi Avraham Tversky Zeitel, blessed be his name, recorded many lectures before his death on how to be a good person. Lectures geared as much to everyone as to Jews. It would be really easy to just take those lectures, generate fake Rabbi Tversky footage where he says horrible things that he, Chas v'shalom, would never have said, post them online as rare footage of revealing what Rabbi Tversky really wants to do. Right. And none of the people involved are going to cross-reference any of this, so they'll be duped immediately. And you can, if you're not Jewish, pick any, like, if you're Christian, or doctors, you can mimic doctors. But yeah, and then there's just the whole facial angle, right? You are wearing the face of another person and pretending to be him in an attempt to literally deceive. I don't think people in the... Well, like, deception is, in a sense, it's a horrifying moral sin. I'm not really going to argue the case that honesty is morally important in this lecture. If you... Well, actually, it will be touching on several aspects of that implicitly when we get into... Like, honesty, trust, and respect are all interconnected. If people don't think you're being honest, they won't trust you. And if they think you're not being honest to them, then they will feel disrespected. And they're not likely to respect you either. And contrary-wise, if you're being dishonest, that shows a lack of respect to your audience and to whoever you're aping. Not to say there's never a reason to lie, but I think about the really important things in life. You should be as honest as you possibly can, laying aside certain moral quandaries for the moment. Especially when it comes to presenting info about other people. See our stream on... The Delicious in Dungeon stream on how to respect your enemies.
Yeah.
So, that being said, yeah, we'll be touching on honesty, but we're mostly going to be focusing here on trust, truthfulness, and freedom. Because I notice this is being taken as a sort of dispute as to what you are free to do when my issue here is that the very basis of artificial mimicry undermines the entire ethos of freedom. And that's why it terrifies me. But that in mind, we're going to launch into. I'm going to start with a real quick. We've talked before on this channel about the absolute basics of communication, right? The Jacobson diagram of in how information is passed on. I'm just going to real quickly repeat it. I'm not going to go too much into it. You can find hundreds of excellent. I mean, you can go to the ideology and language stream for a lengthier elaboration, or find a nice website on the, like, type in Jacobson speech encoding decoding. You'll get dozens of diagrams and articles. Nothing too complex. But the Jacobson method of communication is basically it's a description of how a communication works, which we'll be giving that and seeing how it applies to a deepfake. Because in a Jacobson communication, I have a pile of information I want to impart to. Let's use Hound as an example here.
All right.
Just because you're here.
Some information.
Yeah, I have information. The information exists in my mind. In order, I have to encode the information, which isn't anything fancy. That just means I have to express it a certain way because I'm not beaming it into your mind with my pure meaning bolts. So I have to phrase it, or maybe we're really good at neither of our models have hand gesturing, which is why you can't see my hands frolicking all over like a crazy person. Maybe we're really good at interpretive dance, though, and I can communicate with my hands. That's another form of encoding. Usually we use words. When people talk about encoding, especially online, they usually mean words. Tone, of course, like you can hear the tone I'm using, the pitch. That's all part of communication too. Speed can mimic Ben Shapiro and talk at light speed.
Let's not say we did.
Let's not say we did. Okay, so I encode it. I pass it along. There's a medium, in this case, this YouTube video, before Hound receives the information. He does not receive it just as is. He has to decode it. Right.
Yeah, I have to have decent hearing. I have to have good eyesight. I have to understand your language.
Yeah.
I have to pick up on your subtle verbal cues.
Yeah, subtle verbal cues, connotations.
Yep.
Words all have connotations, and if I use words, I believe we used self-improvement as our example here. For neither of us is this an especially negative term, but there are people who go absolutely ballistic if you give them the word. If you say you should do this for self-improvement, whereas if you say,
yeah, I mean, sorry to derail that for a second, but I just hit different languages have like these. Even then, if you translate them, they have different colloquialisms, like having all your ducks in a row, right? Like,
yes.
What does that mean? You
Yes.
got to decode that. You gotta have the cultural decoder ring.
For real, no cap.
Yeah.
To use some. I should have put a content warning for cringe. No, like that's all stuff. So that's also going to come into play if you're talking to somebody who's from a different region, different culture. Maybe English isn't their first language. We'll be getting into this later because a lot of issues with deepfakes apply. I mean, they apply to everyone, but they almost apply. You'll notice people who are ESL speakers are more likely to fall for them. That's not because of an issue of intelligence or something. That's because they lack the cultural cues that English speakers have picked up on over the years.
Yeah.
Jokes are another one. There's a lot of things you can say to people that you think are hilarious, and maybe other English speakers think they're hilarious, and then the other person is like disgusted or offended. Every time we go to a restaurant, and they're like, "How would you like to pay?" and you're like, "Well, I really wouldn't like to pay at all. A lot of like English speakers get that it's a joke. A lot of I've had a few ESL speakers go, "What? You have to pay, sir?" It's like, no, that was a joke. Paying with debit. I think it's just the cultural info.
Well, yeah, well, like even that, like the idea of like you can say something and not mean it, right? Like
yeah,
certain like neurodivergent people just does like goes does not compute, does not decode.
Does not decode, yeah. Or you can, sometimes in any given conversation, I like to talk about the initial position, which is in any given conversation, you can only go as far in understanding the other person as your initial position will allow. Which, to put that in less abstract terms, if you're talking to a ridiculous fanatic, right, somebody who sees everyone who disagrees with them as evil or stupid or uneducated or in league with Satan, and you give him a view he doesn't recognize, he will just launch into a tirade. Or maybe there's all sorts of other issues. We talked about this in the ideology stream, like presuppositionalism, which is a view in apologetics where you should explain how actually your opponent is secretly dependent on your world. If you're talking to somebody like that, where they are aggressively re-encoding whatever you have to say, whatever you say is just going to be irrelevant. So you're going to stop decoding what they say, and you might say things you just couldn't care or mean at all, right? Just so they leave and like stop bothering you because you're not having a conversation anyways.
Yeah.
And this, I guess, touches on the real point I want to raise, which is your ability to decode something, and by extension, your ability to encode, is directly dependent, like, upon your trust in the information being provided. Right? If it's not accurate, or if you don't care, or if you don't trust the source, like the other one, this can include anything from another person to an institution, then the conversation is worthless. Right? You may as well not have it. There are like all kinds, and this isn't. This shows up all the time in your daily life, where you will meet people who are patently uninterested in having a conversation with you. They're just trying to get you to accept their way of thinking, whether it's their political ideology or their religious ideology, or even just like personal stuff that we don't really tend to think of as philosophies, like everything's about money. I know that gets a lot of flack in philosophy, and most people wouldn't really think of it as a worldview, but it is a worldview that quite a few people hold. And you'll start talking about things like Manichaeism or Japanese weasel demons, and they'll be like, well, how does this help you get money? Right. There is no point in coding or decoding certain information because they cannot receive it.
Yeah.
Right. If they do not care about Japanese weasel demons or Manichaeism or the Egyptian Book of the Dead or equality, or pick whatever word or topic or idea you want, they are not decoding.
So you will not be able to info dump to these people.
Yes, this is the major issue with news agencies or government sources thinking it's okay to be dishonest.
Yeah.
You can sometimes withhold info from people on the grounds that they can't understand it and they'll accept it, right? I say this as an educator. Like, a lot of kids understand that there's topics they can't grasp because they're a child. I believe I've told stories about that. I may have told stories on this channel. If not, I won't repeat them. Some adults do too. Like, I talk to physicists all the time, where I'm well aware I don't understand quantum mechanics or some of the real complexities of cellular biology. I had a longtime family friend who was doing his PhD in a very, I want to say, what would you put, very niche area of cancer research. And I'm like, oh, what are you doing? And he's like, oh, you wouldn't understand it because, and then he gave me a brief, and I'm like, yeah, I can't understand that. That's cool. I want to try and listen, but I can't understand this. But if you're dishonest, and of course, I like that didn't affect my trust in him at all because we both knew the issue wasn't that he was devaluing my intelligence. It was him and I were both correctly understanding that I have not spent 10 years studying cellular biology.
Yes.
With a focus on his exception. Like, it's just knowledge. It's a different matter when you're dishonest to people. Then they stop trusting you. And then they stop decoding. And then you run into situations where the government or a health agency or an NGO or a news agency or your church or whatever can release broadcasts and nobody cares. Right? They are not going to decode.
Yeah.
They're just like, oh, there goes the Catholic Church giving weird nonsense again. Or the UNESCO. Right? I don't trust UNESCO, personally. I do not care what UNESCO has to say about reality, because I don't trust it. Which means I'm like, any brief I get from UNESCO, I'm like, I file away into the mental rubbish bin. Which is actually sort of a problem, because sometimes UNESCO is correct. It's just often impossible to vet the info. So, if this happens, if there's no longer a concern over truthfulness or sincerity or whatever virtue you'd like to call it, the conversation verges out of the truth, the arena of the sort of truth, falsity, and the passage of information, and into I'm going over, like, the technical term used for this in philosophy is bullshit. I am sorry for swearing. But that isn't, or sometimes some philosophers use humbug. Humbug. Harry Frankfurt's On Bullshit is the best short presentation of this particular theory. I've mentioned this essay before. Highly recommend it. It is one of the most valuable essays any of you will ever read on the subject of communication. What defines humbug, or as its other name, is not that the info's a lie. What defines humbug is the info was made with no consideration as to its truth. Right. That's the problem with humbug. It's either made or contrary. Frankfurt is interested in the statements we make, but we can look at it from the other way, the statements we hear or see or absorb. And talk about like a sort of how information that maybe did have an intention of being true or false becomes bullshit, right? Because we no longer see it as true or false statements. You see this a lot with certain, like, as health authorities. A lot of people find them discredited or discreditable. And so people will endorse some really questionable fringe medical theory, and the health authority will be like, don't do that, bro. And people will, not that health, I'm using this example here because I think there is a really, really easy argument, really good, really easy, really strong argument that health authorities are corrupt and that they often give out false information. But they also give out information about, like, the horrible things that happen to you when you drink bleach. And all sorts of other. There's some really weird alternative. Not that I hate all alternative theories. Some are probably true, but there are some really, really weird and really dangerous ones out there. And sometimes health authorities, however corrupt they might be, can still be accurate about why things are, why a given treatment, let's say Bach flower therapy, because that's more obviously on the nonsensical end, even if you are inclined to, like, it goes beyond homeopathy to, I'm trying to, like, the distilled scent of flowers or something like that. been a while since I actually read his book because I wanted to go all the way to the source. And I'm like, this probably doesn't work. If you firmly do not trust health authorities, the info they give you might be true as to why Bach flower therapy doesn't work, or why. I don't really want to state some of the dangerous ones because a lot of them involve really disgusting uses of like glass tubes and knives, going places where glass tubes and knives should never go.
I see we were discussing yoga again.
Yeah, not your friendly local yoga. Some of the really traditional stuff. Just some. There's a whole bunch that are totally fine. It doesn't, like, the information is accurate, but I'm interpreting it theoretically here as bullshit, which is nearly as bad, if not worse, as the converse info, where the info is bullshit and I interpret as if it were true or false. Right.
Yep.
So I hope the relevance of this to AI and to info generated by an AI is immediately apparent.
Yeah, because it's presenting us with information duty code, right? And if you mess up something on the line there, you get garbage in.
Well, yeah, anyone who's been following scientific news in the scientific world since the artificial intelligence revolution will have noticed that a depressingly once AI came out, scientists were like, at last, no more do I have to struggle writing barely legible papers. I can input all my data into ChatGPT and get it to generate a paper for me. And some scientific journals were actually defending accepting this sort of thing because it was either Nature or Science. I think both now ban AI. I want to say they both ban AI now. I hope they do. But one of the two was originally accepting it for a little while.
Did you hear about that one lawyer who had ChatGPT write his defense?
Yes. Well, there was that guy talking about being able to auto-generate lawyer defenses with ChatGPT.
Yeah.
And just a whole bunch, and then I saw it being brought up as a way of allowing people who don't speak English. Like, most research is published in English, which means language is Moldovan, and maybe the only other languages you speak are Russian and Hungarian, just as an example. You cannot publish in most of the world's scientific journals. You can only publish in Moldovan, Russian, and Hungarian journals. And the only people who will ever read your info are Moldovans, Russians, and Hungarians. So there were arguments that we should accept AI-generated papers because it allows people who don't speak English to have the privilege of publishing in English language magazines, and therefore is an equity-based solution. Lay your personal views on equity aside for the moment, this was the argument. The rather obvious problem with this is if you only speak Moldovan and you generate a paper in English, you have no idea how accurate that paper is because you don't speak English. You can't vet the presentation of the info. You can't vet the numbers. I think it was only a few months ago they found out that well over a quarter of research in certain computer science magazines is now being written by computers. And all sorts of errors are now making their way into these magazines. Some of them obvious. There was a really famous one involving a mouse with a hilariously giant schlong. Much of it less obvious, involving data not replicating. Like the AI will take the data and then it won't repeat it. It'll change it in ways that you may not actually notice because your paper is 40 pages long. And last year, so 2023, So in 2022, we had the world's most withdrawn papers ever at 2,000. 2,000 papers retracted for inaccuracies. In 2023, we had the new world's most retracted papers ever at 10,000. And they said when they tabulated that figure that they knew they were thousands short.
So we've just got thousands of papers floating around in the academia sphere with completely bullshit.
Yeah. Not in the sense that the info is necessarily wrong, just in the sense that as readers, especially for those of us who maybe aren't like crystallographers or biologists and don't know what is or is not good crystallography info, it's just pure bullshit. Right?
Yeah.
You cannot vet the info because you just don't have the knowledge base. And you can't trust, if you can't trust the experts or the authorities, however you want to call them, giving you the info because it could all be AI generated. It was real concerning. I know they've been taking steps to address it, but they were mentioning like 1 in 7 papers received was from AI paper mills, where you just input a few keystrokes and it generates a paper for you.
Yeah,
because it's the whole, and then publish.
Yeah, I love that the lawyers just do not get away with this though, because the judges just look up as like, these cases you cited do not exist.
Yeah.
So
cases.
The legal profession is safe from this sort of misinformation because everyone involved is experts.
For the moment.
For the moment.
Yeah, thankfully. Whereas science, less so. It's especially difficult in science because of that language issue, right? Science, it takes place across boundaries. Like we in the West do use Chinese research, but we in the West cannot tell. Like there's when you're talking about vetting info from China, there's 2 barriers, right? 3 actually. There's my knowledge of science as a person. There's my knowledge of the Chinese language, and then 3, there's my knowledge of Chinese culture and academia.
Yep.
Right. With AI, it's there. You cannot vet any info that comes out of China. And I bring this up because they mentioned that like something like 80% of the retracted papers, they all came from this one company that's now been shuttered, or one publisher, not one company, Hindawi. And most of them were published in Russia, Iran, China, and Egypt. So these are papers being published in languages, sometimes in English, but often in languages that we don't speak. And then they get cited, maybe they get cited down the line by somebody else, and they enter English language. And then, of course, the problem is we can't all keep abreast on the news, even if we are in science, right? Like, there's just so much going on, which means that papers will often be retracted and keep being cited for years as a source.
Yep.
And this wasn't an AI issue, this like that one, or I mean, necessarily. Like this has always been an issue with language. It's just one that's now dozens of times worse because of AI's effect on the paper land, like the publishing landscape.
Yeah.
And often this is with info where there isn't even necessarily malice. Like this isn't even we haven't even gotten to deepfakes. Right? This is sometimes people who actually, like, maybe they did the research. Sometimes a lot of the time it's totally fake, but sometimes it is people who did the research. And then because the joke about people involved in STEM is none of them know how to write worth jack. And oftentimes I say that's very true. So they put it through an AI generator to spiffy up the info. And then they don't catch that the AI changed like 2 number values that make the entire paper useless. And the whole thing ends up being disseminated and 500 people cite it down the road.
Yeah.
Or it ends up in databases, or people cite other papers that cite your research. We do this. So I've been drawing extensively on Frankfurt, right? Frankfurt, no, not just on this topic, also on issues like trust and care, and on Jacobson, Frankfurt and Jacobson are both dependent on earlier theoreticians and semiotics. Right? If they made up data, which isn't real, like this is philosophy, so you can't you can make stuff up. It's just harder. Kind of funny, actually, that philosophy is more AI proof than the science in that respect. Than sciences. Sorry. If you make up data and you pass that data along to Frankfurt and Jacobson, and I pass it to you, and then maybe you guys cite it, we have a whole bunch of people citing false info, all stemming to, I don't know, Jacob von Uxkall.
Yeah, there's so there are entire trees here, and if you like corrupt one of the branches, everything that is born by that is thence corrupted.
Yeah, I think there's even a lovely little quote about that with Jesus, where he's like, your roots are rotten, and so your fruit has been putrid too, or something.
Mm-hmm.
I'm totally paraphrasing. Somewhere in the book of John he says that. Or words to that effect. I could be paraphrasing him out of the original meaning.
All right.
But anywho, this all becomes...
Yeah, go on. Back to politics.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, this all becomes 1,000 times worse when we're talking about, like... Wait, like, it's one thing with papers. It becomes 1,000 times worse when we're talking about people willfully... willfully... The word just flew out of my head. Impersonating. We're impersonating.
Yeah.
Willfully impersonating. And I'm using political figures because this is the best example in terms of the most topical. Obviously, I think religion, philosophy, any scientific, just as bad, if not worse. Because what Biden says is not going to impact your soul unless it gets you killed, which is maybe. What the Pope says, or what you think the Pope says, is another matter entirely.
Yeah.
And you're basically talking about info that can produce... Most of the examples we'll use, as I said, are obviously fake. But I will provide... I wasn't able to figure out quite how to make deepfakes before this lecture. I might, if I can figure it out later, I might, because I happen to know enough about most of my enemies, my intellectual enemies, to be able to generate convincing satires on them. Or at least satires involving extensions of their own positions.
Mm-hmm.
You can go to... There's a link to my blog. You can see a couple examples there of me citing...
So you're just going to have Adrian Mayer deepfake.
Adrian Mayer. I can... Let me give you an example here. Like, Musk has been not into the real hard-line transhumanist stuff, but he has dipped his toes into transhumanism, right? He's talked about Neuralink. He's talked about... And I'm using Musk here because he kicked the whole thing off when he started retweeting deepfakes and talking about how they're hilarious. So this is why I'm picking on Musk for the kind of reference here, rather than because I have some unique obsession with the dude. He's talked about, neural chips. He's talked about stuff like electronic cars. I happen to have read a number of the major transhumanist thinkers, like Andy Clark, to give one example. And I'm familiar with some of the truly horrifying proposed theories in transhumanism. I saw somebody, he's a Yemenite, a guy called I'm going to mispronounce this, Al-Ghaili. I am sorry. And he was, I'm not quite certain he was actually endorsing it, because I think he was just talking about potential developments rather than developments he happens to like. But he was talking about that Black Mirror tech that allows you to imprison people within their minds using like neural links, and he's like, and in a few years we'll be able to do this so people can undergo decades of prison in 5 minutes. Like, that's just horrifying. And all you would have to do is take some of those sentences, put them in a realistic order, right? Connect them to things Musk has said involving like Neuralink mind chips, which again he's been very active in promoting. And all of a sudden you can make it look like Elon Musk supports this truly horrifying scientific proposal by connecting Neuralink to Andy Clark's computationalism. His own Clark is a philosopher of mind who's written extensively on what he calls computationalism, and then from there proceed to Al-Ghaili's mental prisons. Right? None of that is especially ludicrous. Those are all real people. Those are all real examples. They can even bring in Yuval Noah Harari, who has also said a lot of really disturbing things over the years. I can do this with, like, there's all the memes about, libertarians and crack cocaine. Have you seen those memes?
Not particularly, no.
Oh, the one, it's the old joke. Back years and years ago, a guy was at the Libertarian National Convention or whatever, and he said, people always accuse, he's like, we will free this country, he's like, but we won't do obviously horrible things like legalize selling crack cocaine to children. And he got booed. And this has led to a series of often very unfair memes about like crack cocaine. And and there are actually ongoing arguments from the not in the sense that I think they're serious. Let's be clear here. I am very firmly in the don't sell crack cocaine to anyone in a camp. Never mind their age. There are, however, ongoing arguments as to the consequences of libertarian theory in philosophy, including by libertarians, like people like Jason Brennan and his name escapes me. The guy who was behind phenomenal conservatism, which is not what you guys think it is. But Michael Huisman, Michael something. Like people have internal disputes in libertarianism all the time. As does everybody else. Like you have people in liberalism and progressivism, and it's just part of being human as you debate what your philosophy actually entails. You can just take some of the weirder proposals, outline them, sort of connect them with the obvious threads, and then put them to a well-known proponent, Michael Huemer, and he's debated other libertarians about the ethics of eating animals according to libertarian theory. Right.
Yeah.
Which isn't a point about whether you like libertarianism or not. It's just a fact about how people engage in reality and discuss stuff with a real concrete example. Right. So you can take this stuff, create a compelling video, and all of a sudden you can maybe not using Ben Shapiro, but you could probably take some other examples from like the Cato Institute or the Mises Institute, which are major libertarian think tanks that produce arguments for libertarian policy, and make it look like they are endorsing some truly absurd things, and then distribute them to people who aren't libertarian, who are unlikely to like actually look into this info. Isn't slamming anyone. This is just a general human failing that's kind of pronounced nowadays, but it happens in reverse too, or in any. And all of a sudden, again, you have these people endorsing, like you've produced philosophical bullshit, and it has been encoded either uncritically as true, or if people are too used to deepfakes, they're just not going to actually care about the info. And then maybe they hate libertarians, so they just don't bother to look into what any Huemer or Jason Brennan or Brian Kaplan, another libertarian theorist, important to I think he was involved in the open borders. That was his idea, or one of his ideas. Wrote Rational Irrationality, I think was his famous book. Like you can people will just sort of accept these things, and they won't look into them. And you can do this. I used libertarianism here because it came to the top of my mind right off the bat. I could use anything else. Right? We could talk about taking Chomsky, Naomi Klein, Terry Eagleton. Those are all Marxist theorists. Put a whole bunch. Take some of the more horrifying or ridiculous views in Marxism. Just like some of the truly like a ban clocks, There have been Marxist writers who have written about how the clock is a symbol of oppression because it quantifies time. And then all of a sudden just apply it to, and people who are like, yeah, this seems like Marxism to me. And I hate to break it to you guys, this happened all the time, even without deepfakes. But with deepfakes, it becomes much worse because now you can convincingly mimic what the actual person says, and formerly videos were believed to be more trustworthy.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, if we all sort of knew, we all knew it was easy to satirize stuff in print.
All right, so did you hear about the recent scandal about the American politician Mark Robinson?
No.
Okay, so there was a Republican running for office, black man, and people dug up. Apparently, he'd been posting to a porn forum called Nude Africa or Naked Africa, and he was like posting about like how much of a fanboy he was of Nazis, and like how maybe slavery was a good thing. A lot of stuff going very far back, but yeah, well, his immediate response is like, "Oh, this is all AI generated."
Yeah. So I actually had heard of that. I just didn't connect it to the name.
Okay. Yeah.
There's been a few involving that over the years. There was one actually just recently on the opposite side of the spectrum involving a German socialist, gay, like either gay or trans. It was outed. I will be fair and say I am not a big fan of private memos being leaked.
Yeah.
Religiously, it is banned by like the Bible. And also, especially when it comes to the erotic stuff, people say all sorts of ridiculous things. But, so maybe, a good example, but I guess in general, I don't, that's probably why I saw it, and then I don't like looking at leaked erotic messages, so I just ignored it.
They did find other stuff too outside of these forums, such as like his photos of his SS officer models, his Ashley Madison account, I think.
Oh, the cheating? Yeah. That's all. Yeah, obviously all bad stuff. Mostly. It is really weird when it comes. Like, people do all sorts of really weird, stupid things in the sphere of the erotic.
Yeah, my point was that he made the defense like, oh, this is just all AI.
Yeah, and in a few years, people could just uncritically accept that.
Yeah,
because like in this case, you can prove there's other stuff going on.
Mm-hmm.
But 20, 30 years from now, or even 5, it just becomes impossible. And also with it's really easy to fake dates on screenshots and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, all AI. There have been a number of ones in Canada lately that actually were AI, involving people make deep fakes of our politicians recommending crypto. And I'm not Bitcoin, like some of the really, Bitcoin is sketchy enough, but some of the more equally sketchy stuff, or some of the much more sketchy, like obviously scam stuff. And then Canada's media isn't especially smart, so some of it gets picked up by actual journalists. And then to compound issues, about 25%, 1/3 of Canada are immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
They do not. Many of them do not speak fluent English. They do not have the English cultural bases. And in other countries, it is in fact commonplace for elected politicians to give monetary advice, right?
Yeah.
Not so much in Canada or in the English-speaking world, because we tend to think of our politicians as distinct from, say, religious figures or economic thinkers. But in places like Iran or Algeria or parts of India or even I want to say China, but where a lot of your elected officials might be religious figures or economists, it's not too unusual to have them giving you financial advice or advice on what to buy or whatever. Um, so there keeps being article after article about like people being scammed out of hundreds of thousands by fake Justin Trudeau or fake Pierre Poilievre, who's for those who don't know, he's the head of the opposition and well, but certainly our next prime minister. Uh, and sometimes actual like just old people who don't know deep fakes are real or deep fakes exist. And think that, yeah.
So there are people getting injured by these. And I know
Yeah.
there's like stuff about like trying to leak faked revenge porn.
Yes. Well, that would be super easy. Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, super hard and deeply immoral under biblical law and all good ethics.
Yeah. I mean, common morality says, hey, this is kind of horrible.
Yeah. Now one would hope.
One would hope.
Yeah.
But yeah.
It's kind of a shame, actually, because a lot of this technology would be absolutely amazing if there were really firm ethical guidelines. And people didn't do stuff like this. Not to endorse anything, but just like it would be really interesting to potentially have the ability to generate, I don't know, convincing goblins. Goblin deepfake. I should look in. That would be funny, eh? Sorry, it's for those of you who go onto my blog. I'm running a series of totally real essays by Caliandra Powderpuff Pixies on why humans don't exist. And now I'm kind of wondering if I should take advantage of. I should like see if I can do deep fakes with a dark crystal or something. It would be hilarious, eh?
Yeah.
All right, sorry. So that would be. Bro, there's a Brian Froud Fairies movie coming out sometime in the next few years. So I don't know. We will see. Do we want to play some? So we mentioned I have some clips. Did you want to? You think now's a good time to play them, and we'll sort of. Okay. Yeah, so we'll play some clips. Again, these are clips of people actively involved in politics. I am not playing you these clips because of a belief, like because of any content in the clips, not because I like the people, not because I hate all the people involved in the clips, usually for reasons that just aren't relevant. But again, this is not what I'm playing for political reasons or because I care. And it's actually kind of funny that for once in life, I and Gavin Newsom are on the same side. Which, oh man. All right. So I'm gonna play. Hold up. Let me here. So here. So let me present. It is not letting me. Hold up. Okay. Is it showing the Gavin Newsom ad?
Yes.
Okay. Alrighty. See the VTubers going on. Okay. All right. So we're going to play.
I cannot hear that.
Oh, is it not sharing audio?
When you do it, when you press present, you press share screen, then you press Chrome tab. Make sure you do also share tab audio.
Oh, here we are. Okay, let me try. Let me first lower the volume.
Yeah,
blast it out.
You should be able to full screen it now that it's sharing.
A lot of people are criticizing me for banning AI-generated political videos. So
can you hear that?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, obviously this is not an actual video because no American politician, like, I mean, we'll talk about what this was the type of joke I used to crack in, like, when I was 8.
Yeah, you can turn it up a little bit.
Turn it up? Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Let me explain. The problem is that Democrats, like me, we're not the brightest bulbs in the tanning bed. We can't always distinguish between reality and fiction. When Elon Musk posted Mr. Reagan's brilliant Kamala Harris parody video.
Okay, let's just be clear here. I've talked before on this channel. Do not assume your enemies are dumb.
Yeah.
This applies just as much to Republicans as it does to Democrats, as it does to atheists, as it does to whatever. So don't make lines like that. So I'm just going to criticize this, I guess, is your goal. Not that I'm not saying this as somebody who is a Democrat. This is just life advice. Do not assume what this video guy is doing. All right.
I thought that was real. And so I realized, without laws governing what we are allowed to see and hear, how will we ever know what's really true? If I don't ban Mr. Reagan's AI parody videos, how would we ever know that Trump will be a dictator on day one, or that if he doesn't win, he's promised a bloodbath? How would we know that Hunter Biden's laptop was Russian disinformation? Also, I'm definitely not gay. Also.
Yes. Okay. I guess we can go on. But like, obviously, this is satire because nobody actually promoting laws restricting free speech would say this stuff. I don't want to keep going through this whole video because I think you get the point of this one. It's just more of this stuff. He's like, general policy, like this one rather obviously fake. I'm going to give one more that's obviously fake, and then I will give one that is still sort of obviously fake, but could, with only one or two twists, could be rather easily bent. I will point out that it is in fact a logical error to conflate laws banning what you can say with laws banning impersonation. Yeah. There. See my earlier example about the fact that it is a felony to pretend to be a priest. Mm-hmm. Like, that's not saying you can't be an atheist. It's banning impersonation of the Pope. All right. This is
great meeting you. It must be nice being in front of a dumb American audience who applaud you because they have no idea how hated and incompetent you actually are.
This one is not on the higher technical end. You can sort of tell. Yeah. Actually, is it common knowledge in America that Justin Trudeau is like 10% approval?
I don't know if it is.
Okay.
I mean, I don't think there's generally a great love of Trudeau in America.
Yeah, like I guess like news update for Americans. I mean, it's not even an anti-liberal talking point that everyone just widely despises this man for many, many, many reasons, or as a policymaker, of course.
So welcome to America.
Glad to be here. Glad to be
here.
Now,
so do all Canadians hate you?
Yes, they do.
Good. Just
yes,
make sure you know.
Oh, we do. Might be part of why I'm here.
Exactly. Is that because you literally shut down people's bank accounts in 2022 like a dictator might?
Yes. Well, as many know, my real father is Fidel Castro, one of the greatest authoritarian.
Okay. Like, again, obviously fake. Right.
Right.
Certainly, like, Colbert would never say that. Also, it is Justin Trudeau would never dad is Fidel Castro because his dad isn't Fidel Castro. And this is again another good example on what not to say about your enemies. Again, not that I don't hate the man, but his dad is not Fidel Castro. And this
you heard that theory?
Well, that his dad is Fidel. Yeah, widely discredited theory in Canada. I don't know why people want to go in for the weird stuff. Just there's more than enough to dislike the dude for like the seizing bank accounts without having to accuse him of. It's not even a clear accusation. Like, why would his mother's act? Like, why would that have anything to do with him? Anywho, so here we go.
Yesterday, a video from comedian Danny Polishchuk went viral that used artificial intelligence in my face to make it seem like Israel had planted explosives inside the rectums of goats, which were then detonated when thousands of members of Hezbollah became intimate with those goats. While humorous, here at CNN, we are very concerned with the proliferation of any fake news that we didn't create ourselves. Yes. Disinformation is a very serious threat to our country and the world when it isn't us here at CNN creating.
So if he wasn't adding, if it isn't us.
Yeah.
I picked this example here because there actually have been dozens of Arab and Islamic regimes over the years who have accused Israel of spy animals. Sometimes not the government, sometimes like people involved. A lot of random, like, you know, Israel has a lot of universities. I know this may sound like a weird statement to self, but universities, they'll tag animals, right, if they want to track them. There have been very consistent issues with random people shooting birds tagged with Tel Aviv University as Israeli spy aircraft. And then it makes the news. And like really weird conspiracies. And over the last year, a lot of these have made their way into American media. Right? You have like MSNBC has actually cited a lot of these conspiracies. A lot of remember there was that bombing. I'm going to stop sharing now because I think that was enough. Do you remember not too long ago, there was that ISIS bombing in Russia? I cannot count the number of major right-wing commentators arguing that Israel controls ISIS and that Israel blew up a random Russian opera house for absolutely no reason other than to like rebuke Russia. Their citation for this was falsified info from a Libyan conspiracy magazine accusing Mossad of being behind ISIS from 2016. I cannot count how many people I saw share this article all over the place. Some with hundreds of thousands of followers, half of whom are going to be bots, but still more than half. So this types of info does get spread around, and this isn't me, I guess, taking stances on stuff. This is just, I would absolutely believe that like MSNBC or like that video is obviously a joke. I could 100% believe that MSNBC or CNN or even some of the weirder, I'm trying to think some of the more conspiratorial right-wing stuff would accuse Israel of exploding goats. It's not the most ridiculous accusation, because you actually can prime it. And obviously, the one about having, with a goat is on the more risible end. But the goat itself is in the realm of reality.
Yeah.
Like, still obviously fake, but getting to real. And I've already mentioned, like, I could go one step farther and generate, like, basically, remove the disinfo we didn't make ourselves, which CNN is obviously not going to say on its channel.
Yeah.
Remove the sexual element and just talk about, like maybe instead of, as they were, you do be doing it with the goats, talk about, an attack on civilians or whatever. MSNBC would 100% air that. Right. Replace it with, I think it's Joy Reid who's the MSNBC host, right?
Yep.
Somebody like Rachel Maddow.
I don't know the hosts.
Okay. You could get a lot of people. You could generate a basically pretty convincing fake. About 5 seconds editing on that one. 5 seconds truncation. And I'm using this example here because there actually was one in Canada. It wasn't deep faked. They just CTV, which is one of our news sites here, was caught editing footage of the head of the opposition to make it imply that he wanted to shut down the government because he hated free dental. And they fired everyone involved. The CTV, not the government. But the government, Canada's media is state-funded. Right? It's not quite state-controlled, but it is state-funded, which is very important for when you see news coming out of Canada. Just keep that in mind. That we talk about an free and independent press. It is not independent in Canada.
Yeah.
Because the guy in charge of that particular program, there are several individuals who oversee it. Amongst them, and I won't name names, not to insult anyone, but you'll find them pretty easily if you look up like CTV footage scandal, because they've been tweeting out that like, well, it may not have been literally true, but we all know it was true in spirit. Or like in other words, like, would anyone really doubt it? And the guy in charge on the government end of overseeing funding has been arguing that like actually it was bullying the media to say they should not post falsified footage.
Interesting. Very fun country you live in.
Yeah, fun country, and I'm using this as an example here so that people understand this is not a one or the other side political issue.
Mm-hmm.
You can be stupid, whatever your politics, or stupid, or have almost no idea of the long-term implications of what you're doing. And in a few months, Canada's probably just going to follow the States and ban deepfakes, I hope. Follow California. I hope personally. If they don't, we're about to go into an election here, and we could very easily go into an election where our state-funded media is airing faked footage of the opposition. I don't know what I need to say to convince people that is a disaster just waiting to happen. No, and it's not necessarily a disaster because anyone will believe it. It's a disaster because what it entails about the reliability of our information.
Yeah.
We've spoken before. Everyone always talks about, like, when they talk about dystopias that are coming true, the first one that comes to mind is 1984. And then sometimes you see references to, like, Idiocracy or Brave New World, or Harrison Bergeron, which is also pretty accurate. But the one that I think is really coming true, and have I spoken about it on stream or just in private to you?
Yeah, what is it?
Fahrenheit 451.
You have mentioned that in I think our last stream.
Yeah, like I did, so I won't go too much. Like Fahrenheit 451, it's a far future where people stop caring about the truth and politics becomes entertainment. And in a way, we've already seen this happen. Like, I think for a lot of people involved in politics, it's like rage entertainment rather than something that's actually intended to do anything or help anyone. Certainly, you have similar areas in religion, right? We all know those channels, atheist, religious, or otherwise, that air, like they're dedicated to hating on another religion. And they will run idiots like Muslim cleric says it's okay to do it with a watermelon, to pick an example from a Shiite-Sunni debate. Christian pastor encourages his audience, or Christian pastor caught doing drag, or stuff like that. All these channels that just are dedicated to this sort of hate mail.
Yeah.
And now they have a free supply of limitless fake info that almost nobody can vet because, like, to give you there are how many? There's probably a couple million how many pastors are there in the U.S.? Probably a lot, a few 100,000. Yeah. Maybe a million. Probably not. I don't know. Well, that would be 1 in every 300, which is maybe too many people. But certainly a few 100,000, I think, is a realistic guess. You are, even if you're religious, you're not likely to know more than a couple dozen. I can only name maybe 8 or 9, most, and they're all prosperity gospel. Stuff like Paul or Joel, like Joel Osteen. I was about to name a few others, but now that I think about it, none of them are preachers. They're just theologians. Mm-hmm. But yeah, like Joel Osteen, Billy Graham. There's that guy, something Ben. John Piper, John MacArthur. That's basically about it for my knowledge of Christian pastors. Yeah. And I, without tooting my own horn, I know more about Christianity than most people who aren't Christian. This isn't a compliment. This is just a fact. And I certainly know more than people with a rabid hatred of Christianity, or many people with a rabid hatred, I should say. And now we start seeing videos about like, rabidly anti-gay pastor caught doing drag. To use an example here that I guess sort of touches on the one you provided, and we can reply the reverse here, eh? As I said, I mentioned I'm not going to give his name because I am very not a fan of private life leaks for religious reasons. But there was that German guy I saw who got kicked out after he was caught recording Nazi homoerotica while running for a far left party. And so, like you can, there's all these activists and preachers and other figures that most people don't know about. You can just generate hundreds of really convincing fake videos in 5 minutes. Right. So you basically end up in a situation where, the subtext here has been like freedom. And I've mentioned on this channel before, there's sort of guiding questions to what it means to be, earlier on I talked about like, what does it mean to be moral? Why do we want to be moral? What is morality? And I used as an example, I used morality, and I mentioned Socrates, not because for anyone who's watching this channel, you're probably already interested in living a moral life, because this is a philosophy channel. I'd hope you're interested. And I mentioned discussions like this are less about convincing people who doubt as they are about providing structure for those who do want to live a moral life, and to doing so in a way that's accurate to the goals and purposes of morality, rather than becoming obsessed with one moral value or another and losing track of the ultimate point. The same really applies to freedom. Like, why do we want to be free? Like, why do we not want to live under a hardline totalitarian regime? I know, a bit weird of a question, and in the sense, like, I'm not going to convince anybody who actually wants a hardline totalitarian regime not to by asking it. But it is relevant because we're talking about what is freedom and why should it exist in our society and why is it important. We really don't want to engage in sort of ways of being free that undermine freedom itself. Similar to the morality example. Or using logic in illogical ways, which is a lot of Lewis Carroll. Like, Lewis Carroll was a logician. A lot of his jokes in Alice in Wonderland are about the really stupid things you can do with logic. And you can just be a totally irrational nutcase with logic. It's just really easy. It is really, really easy. Right. And I bring this up because it doesn't really matter. Morally speaking, like metaphysically, it does not matter what you are or are not allowed to say. If you can't trust that whoever you're talking to or listening to exists,
Dang. All right.
There is no point to having freedom or not having freedom, or even discussing what it might be like to have freedom in a world where there just is no trust. No, like, if you cannot confirm that anyone around you is real, why be free? Like, what's the merit of engaging with the people who don't exist on free footing or not?
Yeah.
Why not just go tinga winga woo and dance off into the distance at that point? So, do you have time for us to... The last thing on the note was to sort of step back and examine why freedom exists in liberal democracies.
All right, sure.
Do you have time to decay? We still got half an hour.
Yeah. I'm fine for that.
Yeah. So, like, why be free? Right? Why does it matter? And how does this sort of engage in the question of AI? I'm going to step back 500 years.
Ooh.
Yeah, we are going to step. So in the Western governments and Western people live under what we call liberal democracies. This does not mean we're all politically liberal. This means that undergirding our political institutions, and to a certain extent all types of other institutions such as charities or religious institutions or your university, is a vision of man in his society as fundamentally free. Right. What this means will change across liberal regimes. The examples I'm using are not quite as relevant to the American context, because you guys very much define freedom as sort of lack of control or lack of order.
Yeah, it's very, very much defined in terms of like liberty.
Well, in terms of, say, liberty from constraint, rather than in in a Hegelian sense, maybe, as the ability to become fully human. And
your entire national mythology is built off of getting out from under someone's control.
Yes,
that makes total sense.
Yeah. So this maybe isn't as relevant to the American mythic consciousness, but this is still like, why did liberalism develop in the West? And this is, I'm going to go, I know, like, in a lot of Christian circles, there's that famous passage from C.S. Lewis about the historical point of view. And sort of Lewis implies, this is in the Screw Tape Letters, I'll say letter 14, letter 15. Lewis implies, or it says outright, that analyzing things from the historical point of view is a way to avoid considering whether or not they're true. It can be the case, but you can also go in the opposite way, because sometimes you do have to look at why somebody made a decision in historical context to figure out what was the actual merit of that decision. Right. So this is 500 years ago. Martin Luther nails 95 theses to the door of it was in Württemberg. I might have the city wrong, but he nails 95 theses to the door of the church. He launches the Protestant Revolution. And medieval Europe was never quite as religiously unified as a lot of histories say. Like, you always had pretty large Christian heretical groups in the West. You had Eastern Orthodoxy in the East. You had Jews in plenty of places. You had pagans surviving into the 13th, 14th, 16th centuries. But at any event, the church itself was mostly unified. And in the space of, 10, 20 years, it just fragments. All of a sudden, Western Europe, which is Poland on to the west, went from one church to dozens. Because you had the Lutherans, you had the Anglicans, you had the Radical Reformation, Anabaptists, Mennonites, Calvinists, so on and so forth. You had still various disparate infighting amongst Catholic groups. And then, of course, you had all the other usual people, like there were still Jews in Western Europe. And you had Muslims to the east and south, and then you had the Eastern Orthodox this is going to be as relevant in the West, but if you get into more Central Europe, like Serbia, Croatia, even parts of into Hungary, you have Eastern Orthodox churches, and all of a sudden it becomes a pressing political question how you are supposed to adjust for religious diversity in institutions, right, at a government level. Mm-hmm. This was not an issue in Rome, because Rome executed anyone who denied the mos maiorum. I know sometimes we something like a sort of tolerant pagan myth. They did. It was not the tolerant pagan. Rome, like very strict religious law, which was, I won't say uncritically, but mostly uncritically, with some notable exceptions, interwoven with the state, especially in the imperial period, because Augustus positioned statues of himself in between the house spirits and claimed to be the guard of the house, on par with house spirits, thus shifting the Roman imperial cult fully into the realm of politics. And then throughout most of Europe's early history under Christendom, you had reasonable agreement as to what the ethical and religious values of the political figures involved were. Which isn't to say there weren't very profound debates on the relationship between religion and politics in medieval Europe, just not in the way we have them today. And then in the 15th century, 16th century, even on into the 17th century, you have 5 different churches in one country, all battling it out. And after a few years, it became obvious to people that you could no longer uncritically assume that the government was going to follow one church or another, or you would be forced to oppress and sometimes even murder people who, at the end of the day, held religious values very similar to you. And this leads to, it was one of the things that led to what we now call liberalism. Right? The primal motivation of the early liberals, right, the main reason they did the things they did was not to abolish religion from politics, as is often falsely assumed. It was because they wanted to, their worry was if you fought over religious law in politics and did things that were in violation of the spirit of those laws, which is just sort of like politics is combative. It's antagonistic. I won't say there's no such thing as a politics of love, but the two are certainly separate and to some extent irreconcilable. And it sort of became obvious to liberal thinkers, and even to a lot of people who weren't liberal, like a lot of the more traditional people, that if you wanted to protect the actual values of your religion, right, and this is, we can talk about some of the less, when we talk about religious values, we always tend to focus on like eating bacon or not going to church on Saturday or Sunday. The minor stuff is what tends to come up in the West. In context, this is going to be things like the nature of truth, human dignity, what it means to be saved, the nature of love itself. You needed to base a foundational respect on dignity prior to the imposition of religious law. To put it another way, you cannot truly become fully human or free. The two are sort of identical in Reformation era political thought and in some post-Reformation era politics. You cannot become truly human if dignity is not fundamentally respected. And this entails a commitment to freedom politically. It's sort of, think of it like raising a child, right? The child is not rational. The child cannot control himself, but if you don't assume that the child is capable of doing these things while these are still paternalistic political regimes, so while guiding the child, right, ensuring he doesn't stick a fork into an electrical outlet, the child will never develop rational thought or the ability to control himself. Right? This is why should you actually have complex conversations with children? Because if you treat them like they're idiots, they will grow up to become idiots. Right? Treat your child. It's not that children are actually intelligent. It's you have to treat them that way. So in order for people, this was how liberals thought at the time, and these are like 500 years ago, so again, maybe not necessarily relevant, but the idea was people cannot become free unless they are first granted freedom. Foundational to this, though, is the notion of, I want to say growth, becoming. Is that maybe a good way to put it? Like actually becoming free. Right? There is structure in early liberal theory underlying freedom, and if what you do sort of threatens the nature of freedom itself and the pursuit of freedom, that's when it leaves the sphere. Right? This is why, for instance, you do not have a right to like murder people or commit horrible sex crimes or armed robbery, because you are fundamentally crippling people's ability to grow and become free and behaving in ways entirely contrary to the purpose of freedom in the first place. Again, limited relevance to the contemporary political situation because these are all regimes that no longer exist. With political theorists, a lot of people nowadays may like Robert Filmer, figures like Hegel, Franz Xaver von Baader, and the Reformed thinkers are flying out of my mind at the moment. But there's some pretty good examples from early Reformed thinkers too on this topic. Michael Meyer, so on and so forth. A lot of figures that sometimes ones we didn't even think of as political. And my point here is when we talk about what does it mean to be free and what does it mean to be free in the West, there are actions that just undermine why we actually want to be free. Like why does being free, and sometimes these actions are and perhaps should be legal. Like some of the stuff you are entitled to say is not stuff you should say in the West or in anywhere to anyone, for precisely the reasons we've talked about for an hour and a half now. Right? If what you say causes the other person to lose any interest in decoding what you're saying, it just ceases to be relevant what you can and cannot say. Which applies as much to freedom of the press and academic freedom too. But yeah, any contributions to make there, Hound? Elaborate questions. You are muted. I am not hearing you if you're talking.
Dang. I said no. I think you've said it quite well.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one, I think using someone's likeness without their explicit consent is very troubling, to say the least. But yeah, two, we need to preserve a field where we can reasonably have discussions.
Yeah.
At all.
Yeah. Basically, that's the real, I guess, concerning angle. You want to have a space to talk. In really ancient theories of free speech, or what used to be called parrhesia in Greco-Roman and Jewish political theory, the concern was less were entitled to say and more creating spaces in which they could say it. We see, like, why do we see so many references to the forum and in like Roman political areas, or even if you read any Jewish works like the Talmud, they were interested in creating spaces where people could have free arguments.
Yeah.
In fact, the Roman, I think it was the Forum, they always had statues of Marsyas, who was a deity particularly associated with free speech and free discourse. to symbolize precisely that fact. Obviously, they did not have statues of Marsyas in the Jewish forums, but certain, very, not similar, but you would, what is it? You would, so yeah, sit down. There's a very specific ritual or discussed throughout parts of the Talmud. But yeah, I think that's about our case, unless there's anything else you wanted to add, mention.
No, I think we're good.
All right. So yeah, I'm just going to thank you once more, everyone who listened in. It was an absolute pleasure. I hope you have a very good night. And yeah. Remember, gnomes are real.
Gnomes are real.